Here begins the tale of the bald king who ruled a kingdom of silver dust and quiet dreams. His head shone beneath the sun like a mirror of fate, and the people bowed to the glow that crowned him. His queen Salora walked beside him, her eyes deep as forgotten wells. They spoke to one another in silence, for love needed no words. One evening the wind turned black and the bells refused to ring. The sky was thick with voices that did not belong. The bald king felt the chill before the torches dimmed, and he knew something had come, something older than the gods. A magician of the black roots stepped from the darkness, his robes alive with shadows, his voice smooth as stone. He said, "I have come for what is most precious to you." The king stood unmoving. The queen trembled like a candle, but her voice did not break. She said, "You cannot take what is bound by love." The magician laughed, a sound like tearing cloth, and the ground split. The king raised his blade, but the air itself fought him. The magician spoke words that were not meant for mortal ears, and in an instant the queen was gone. The castle grew cold, the walls breathed frost, and every mirror wept. The bald king screamed into the silence, and his crown fell from his head. He wandered through his halls and found them hollow. The servants were whispers, the guards were dust. He left the throne behind and walked into the forest where no man dared. The trees bent toward him as if listening, their roots twined like fingers. The air smelled of forgotten blood. He called Salora, but only echoes answered. Then a soft voice whispered, "My king, do not follow." And he froze. It was her, but twisted faint as smoke. He stepped forward, each foot sinking into mud that pulsed like a living heart. Shadows brushed his shoulders. He saw faces inside the bark of trees, eyes blinking, mouths mouthing words he could not hear. The moon hid itself behind a shroud and the night turned endless. He reached a clearing where bones gleamed pale beneath the lightless sky. He knelt and found a crown carved of bone with his name upon it. He held it high and the wind shrieked his name. Arkan, the bald king. He felt his tears burn and vanish before they fell. He spoke to the darkness, "If you hear me, return her." The forest laughed and the magician's voice drifted through the branches, "You cannot save what has chosen the other side." The king roared and the earth shuddered. He swore he would tear through life and death to reclaim her. He pressed onward, the trees parting with reluctance, the shadows thickening like blood around him. Every step was a prayer, every breath a curse, and though his heart trembled, his resolve burned brighter than the stars that hid from him. In that moment the kingdom slept, haunted by dreams of a bald king walking alone into the dark. The moon was red above the haunted kingdom, and the wind whispered through the broken towers as the bald king stood alone in his dark throne room. The echo of his queen's laughter haunted every corner. He could still see her dancing in the golden halls before the curse fell upon them. The magician had taken her away, but her voice still called his name at night. It was not love anymore, it was something darker. The king's crown lay cracked on the floor, its jewels dull and cold, and every mirror in the palace showed not his face but the queen's crying eyes. He walked through the halls with his sword in hand, and every shadow turned its head to watch him. The servants were gone, only their voices remained whispering his name. "Bald king, she waits beneath the lake." He went to the courtyard where the fountain had dried and the water had turned black like ink from old blood. He knelt beside it and saw his reflection flicker between his own face and the magician's grin. The curse deepened his rage. He shouted her name and the sky answered with thunder. In the deep woods beyond the castle the magician had made his lair, hidden among twisted trees glowing with strange blue fire. The queen sat there pale and still, her eyes blank under a spell. Her voice hummed a lullaby that made the dead flowers move. The magician smiled and fed on her sorrow. Each tear she shed gave him power, but even he feared the coming night, for the bald king was not mortal anymore. He had traded his soul to the spirits of the grave. He had sworn to tear the world apart until his queen was free. That night the gates of the castle opened by themselves and the soldiers' armor began to move without men inside. Ghosts of his fallen knights rose and knelt before him. Their hollow voices said the oath of loyalty, "We live, we die, we serve the bald king." He raised his sword and pointed to the forest. The ground shook as if the earth itself obeyed him. The march began. Cold light filled the sky as if the stars were watching a war of the damned. When they reached the forest the trees began to bleed red sap. The magician stood waiting, his staff glowing, the queen behind him whispering, "Stop, my king, stop, or the darkness will swallow you." But he no longer heard her. He swung his sword and the ground split open. Ghosts poured out screaming, chains of fire wrapped the magician, but his laugh still echoed and his eyes burned like suns. He shouted, "You cannot take her, she belongs to the curse now." The bald king stepped into the fire, his skin burned away, yet he walked through it untouched. His empty eyes shone white like lightning. He cut through the spell that held his queen, and for a moment she saw him not as a monster but as the man she had loved. Her tears fell on his hands turning to light, but the magician's last words echoed, "Beware, bald king, every love taken from death must be paid with life." The queen fell into his arms, her body warm again, but his reflection in her eyes showed no man, only a hollow crown of bones. The curse had shifted, the magician was gone, but his power had chosen a new master. The bald king now ruled the dead forest, and his queen woke in a kingdom here even time dared not move. The crows flew over the ruins calling his name, and in their cries the legend was born. The bald king had won, but his soul was lost forever.
The dawn never came that morning. The sky above the haunted kingdom stayed bruised with storm clouds and the air tasted of ashes. The bald king sat upon his throne of cracked stone, his eyes pale as frost. The queen sat beside him silent and trembling. Though her heart still beat, she could feel that this place no longer belonged to the living. Every sound echoed as if the walls themselves were breathing and whispering to her, "Run, run before he remembers what he has become." The spirits of the castle wandered freely now, guards made of smoke, maids with hollow eyes carrying trays of dust. The bald king ruled them all, but his voice carried no warmth, only command. He had brought his queen back, yet she was no longer safe. His touch chilled her, his shadow crawled like a living creature across the floor, and sometimes when she looked at him she saw not her husband but the faces of the souls he had taken, whispering through his skin. Outside the castle the dead forest had begun to move, trees twisted into figures that knelt before the palace. Animals returned with 2 heads and glowing eyes, and the rivers ran backward singing in strange tongues. The magician's curse had not vanished, it had only found a new heart to feed on. The bald king had become its vessel and the kingdom bent beneath his will. The villagers who once fled now returned as shadows drawn to his power, bound to serve forever. One night the queen heard a voice calling her name, soft, gentle, like a memory. She followed it through the cold corridors, past the mirrors that bled faint light. She came upon the chamber where the magician had first bound her, and in that place his ghost waited, his eyes dim but his smile bitter. He told her the truth: the king's soul was no longer his own, it was bound to the throne, and the only way to free him was to destroy the heart of the kingdom, the throne itself. She wept, for she knew what that meant: to destroy it was to destroy him. The next evening when the bald king rose from his endless dreaming, she stood before him, her eyes full of sorrow and fire. She said, "My king, the curse still lives within you, let me end it." He looked at her, and for a fleeting breath the man he once was returned. His voice cracked like breaking stone. He said, "If you love me you must not touch it, for if the throne falls I will vanish with it." But the curse hungered for her soul and began to whisper through the walls, urging her to break the seal to take his crown. As thunder roared above the castle, the queen reached for the crown, her hands shaking. The spirits screamed. The bald king stood rising slowly, his cloak made of shadow stretching across the hall. He cried out, "Stop!" but she was already holding it. The crown burned her palms, turning her blood to silver. The light burst through the throne room walls and the ghost screamed in agony. The palace began to crumble. The forest howled like a dying beast. When the light faded there was silence. The queen woke on the cold floor, her body weak, her eyes searching for him. The throne was gone, the hall empty, the crown shattered. She whispered his name but only the wind answered. Outside the forest had turned to stone and the river was still. The kingdom was free but her heart was broken, for the bald king was no more. Yet as the moon rose full and white above the ruins, a shadow moved on the horizon, the whisper of his name carried by the wind, not gone, only waiting for the next moon's call. The bald king sleeps but never dies, and somewhere deep beneath the earth his eyes open once more. The moon hung low that night, cold and swollen like an unblinking eye. The queen wandered through the ruined halls, her gown torn and gray, her hands still scarred from the burning crown. The kingdom lay silent, turned to ash and stone, but her heart beat with one forbidden hope to bring back the bald king. She could feel his shadow beneath the ground, whispering her name through the cracks in the marble floors. "Come to me, my queen, come to the dark where love still breathes." She gathered what remained of the ancient court, the pale monks who once served the throne, now half ghosts themselves. They warned her of the old ways, the rites forbidden by gods and men, but she cared for nothing except his voice. She begged them to guide her to the catacombs beneath the palace where the throne's roots lay, the place where his last breath had turned to shadow. They obeyed trembling, for they knew the curse had not died, only slept, waiting for her call. Deep under the earth she lit candles of black wax, their flames bending backward, the air thick with the smell of old blood. She placed the shards of his crown in a circle, each one still humming faintly with his spirit. Then she cut her palm and let her blood fall on the stone, chanting the words the magician had once whispered to bind her soul. Her voice echoed through the tunnels, calling his name, and the earth answered with a slow groan. The ground cracked open and darkness spilled out like smoke from a dying fire. A shape began to form from it, tall and thin, crowned in ash, his eyes 2 burning holes. He stepped forward, whispering her name, his voice both thunder and sorrow. She ran to him, but as she touched his hand it was cold as death, and her heart froze. For a moment she saw his face, not as her king but as a creature made of every spirit he had ever taken. They stared at her from beneath his skin, begging to be released. He spoke to her then, "My queen, you should not have called me back. The curse feeds on love once dead. Now that I walk again the world must pay. The shadows will rise and all that breathes will fade." She begged him to fight it, to stay himself, but his voice trembled. "I no longer remember who that is. The throne is gone, but the curse made me its heart. Now as long as I exist darkness will spread." Above them the castle shook, dust falling like snow. Statues cracked open and from their hollow centers figures of smoke crawled free. The old knights reborn as wraiths bound to the bald king once more. The forest outside awakened, black leaves sprouting from stone trees. The river began to flow backward again, its water whispering in voices of the dead. The kingdom was alive again, but not in the way she had wished. The queen fell to her knees, tears of silver falling on the floor. She begged him to end it, to take her soul. Instead he lifted her gently and said, "There is no end, my love, only the echo of what we were." As he spoke, his crown of ash turned to fire and the light spread through the catacombs. Every spirit screamed in hunger. The curse had found its new form, no longer chained to the throne but carried in his living heart. The queen felt herself fading, her body turning to mist, her spirit bound to his. She became the queen of shadows, her eyes glowing beside him as they walked through the ruins, hand in hand, rulers of the dead, the bald king and his dark queen together again beneath an eternal night. Far above the clouds the moon dimmed as if hiding its face. The world of the living began to forget their names, but in dreams children still whispered of them, the king without life and the queen who followed him into darkness. And somewhere in the deep silence of the earth their laughter echoed softly, not cruel, only endless.